The main point was to find out what is the kind of the best practices around the world for how universities are involved in the funding the startups coming out of the universities. And so it's important for us to understand the funding environment around that. So the idea of this study was to look at universities that were doing things apparently pretty well and seeing how we might modify the way we do things based on that. In the U.S., the way people fund risky companies, risky technologies, is a little bit different, a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more risk-taking. And so I think what we found, while there were relatively fewer models in Europe for funding startups, there were plenty of different approaches in the U.S. So we're now reviewing what our approach towards equity funding will be in the future, both and actually beyond funding even, if and how we will take equity in our startups. So today, if we're funding a case within the university that ultimately results in a startup, we'll usually take a royalty, so a couple % of the net sales, either through the startup or if we license it to a big company. In the future, we're considering both taking equity for our IP, so intellectual property, so if we develop algorithms or we develop materials or processes that are patentable or otherwise might have value, then we would swap those to the company in return for some percentage of equity, being, again, relatively low. Second, we're looking at the financial aspects of whether we should either directly or indirectly have some seed funding to put into companies as they start up. I think we'll never have an exclusive relationship. In other words, we'll never make it so, or at least we don't foresee making it so an outside fund would have exclusive access to our deal flow. I think we're already starting to see some successes around Europe. Cambridge, Imperial College, and others Oxford have successful programs, and now we see some in Sweden and other places. I think the key here is what is the mix of resources, being financial and human and capital intensive, that companies need to have in the beginning to have a decent shot at making it. So we hope with this study and subsequent actions to be able to make it easier for companies to start up and of course create more lucrative investment opportunities for both private funds, angels, and other players as well. So now it's kind of in an evaluation phase, and I would expect during the next 1 to 2 years that we would kind of update based on the most successful models and try to participate more in those processes.
I spent the last 11 years in the US. My undergrad that I did in Utah, my MBA that I did at Harvard Business School. Also worked in between, did consulting. I don't notice that very positive things were happening in Finland. I then wanted to return here. As a result, I came and worked for a startup. Did that for 2 years or so, a year and a half. But noticed that there was more of a need for something even bigger to help change the ecosystem. So we are building a platform or a vehicle with which to help startups. But as a part of that, we wanted to do a study as to what had been done in universities around the world. Naturally, we felt we wanted and needed information to understand how to best work with the universities with this vehicle we're building. But then also, ACE, I think, wants to build their vehicles for Aalto University with which they can help entrepreneurship forward. There's very little data online or really anywhere in any publications on, firstly, seed funds, secondly, on university-related VC funds. So we basically had to go to universities themselves. Some had information about themselves, about how they work, what their funds are like. Online. In some publications we use those as well. This connection with VC funds and universities actually does exist, and it's used at major universities around the world, well, in the US and some in Europe. I think that's major. That's just proof that Aalto and the likes in the Nordics, in Finland, could also participate in some different ways. I think we're seeing a worldwide or global movement towards seed stage and seed funds. It's much cheaper to put together a startup company. Companies are moving faster, and there's a lot of action there right now. And I think Europe is doing a catch-up game with the US.